They didn't just miss my wedding. They orchestrated it so no one would show up. 4 rows of empty chairs stared back at me where my parents and sister should have been. While I tried to smile through vows, my phone shook with dozens of calls, not to celebrate but to demand I save Megan's party. And then came the photo, my sister glowing in white, wearing the diamond necklace my grandmother had pressed into my hands years ago, promising it would rest against my heart on this day. In that instant, joy curdled into grief, and grief hardened into something else entirely. The realization that my family had erased me and claimed even the one piece of love I thought was mine. If you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The glass ceiling of the Boston Conservatory glittered with late afternoon light, scattering gold across the rows of chairs lined up beneath it. A string quartet played softly the opening notes of At Last Rising Like a Prayer in the Air. My veil brushed my shoulders with every breath as I took those first hesitant steps down the aisle. The dress was heavier than I remembered, in the fitting room layers of satin pulling against me, but Daniel's face at the far end made it feel lighter. He looked at me the way you look at a promise you didn't think you deserved but somehow got anyway. Laughter rippled from the left side where my college friends sat shoulder to shoulder. Monica waved discreetly, her camera tucked into her lap, while a couple of neighbors leaned forward with wide smiles. The sound of children whispering made me smile despite the ache forming in my chest. Every chair reserved for friends was filled, programs folded neatly in their hands, eyes turned toward me with warmth. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in. The lemon slices floating in the water, pitchers. The flicker of lanterns strung along the conservatory walls. The murmur of joy that should have drowned out everything else. But it didn't. Because the 4 rows at the front, marked with delicate white cards stamped "Reserved," stood empty. Not a coat slung over the back, not a handbag resting at the foot, not a trace of perfume or scuff of a shoe. Just silence and polished wood that reflected the sunlight too clearly. They should have been filled with my father's rumbling cough laugh, my mother's Chanel number 5 drifting through the air, my sister Megan's exaggerated sigh as she rolled her eyes for attention. Instead, there was only vacancy, as if those chairs had always been meant for strangers, not the people who raised me. I felt the emptiness press against my ribs, sharper than the violin strings. My hands shook around the bouquet of lilies and roses I'd chosen to honor my grandmother, their scent rising sweet and stubborn. I lifted my chin, tried to focus on Daniel. He was waiting at the altar, eyes glistening, lips trembling with the beginnings of a smile. He mouthed, "Breathe," and I did, dragging air into lungs that felt tight with shame I couldn't name out loud. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and in so many ways it was. Yet every step across the tiled floor echoed louder because of who wasn't there. When I reached halfway down the aisle, Aunt Helen, who wasn't really my aunt but always called me her niece, winked at me, tears already streaking her cheeks. She squeezed the hand of the woman beside her and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw the compassion in her eyes. My shoulders loosened for a moment. Then the emptiness beside her seats yawned wider, reminding me that Helen had shown up when my own family hadn't bothered. I forced a smile as Monica raised her camera and the shutter clicked. I tried to memorize the warmth of the light, the sound of the quartet, the way the flowers trembled slightly in my grip. If I paid enough attention to those details, maybe they could cover the soundless accusations coming from those 4 empty rows. I told myself that my coworkers cheering my running group, whistling my neighbors waving were enough. And in many ways, they were more than enough. These were the people who had chosen to be here. But even so, a childlike voice inside me kept whispering it was supposed to be Mom, Dad, and Megan. It was supposed to be them. As I reached the altar, Daniel's hand slipped over mine, firm and grounding. His thumb traced the edge of my palm, a secret reassurance only I could feel. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice breaking. I blinked hard, smiled for him. Let the minister begin. The vows would come, the rings, the kiss, and the life we had dreamed about. But I wanted all of it. I wanted to believe that the sharp edges of today would dull with time, that the pictures would show joy rather than absence. But deep down, I already knew something else. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. My family had chosen to be somewhere else on the one day I had asked them to be here. I squeezed Daniel's hand tighter, the bouquet trembling between us. Around me, applause rose as the quartet shifted songs, the guests rising to their feet. It should have been enough to drown out everything else. But I've always understood the language of silence better than most, and in that silence of the front rows, I heard everything. When I was a child, the Bennett house in the suburbs of Boston always smelled faintly of lemon polish and my mother's perfume. To most people, it looked like any other tidy New England home, but to me it was a place divided in two. On one side stood Megan, my younger sister, the golden child who drew light toward her. On the other side stood me, always in the shadows, learning early that attention came with conditions. I remember birthdays the most. Megan's parties were extravaganzas. My mother, Patricia, would cover the dining room in pink streamers, and balloons hire clowns or magicians and invite her entire class. The cake was always 3 tiers dripping with frosting roses, and Megan got the first biggest slice, her name written in perfect script across the top. Mine were different. A single cake cut before I blew out the candles divided into pieces, so there was never a chance for me to claim it whole. My gifts were sweaters from discount racks or books no one had bothered to wrap properly. "You know money's tight," my mother would say with a sigh. While a week later she'd be at the mall buying Megan a new leotard for ballet. My father, Richard, was quieter but no better. He never shouted, never raised a hand, but his silence was its own kind of judgment. When I brought home an essay with an A, he barely looked up from the newspaper. "That's fine," he'd mutter before turning to ask Megan about her dance recital. When she twirled in the living room, he clapped as if watching a Broadway star. I learned quickly that excellence didn't matter if it came from me. Praise was reserved for Megan. It wasn't always dramatic, but it was constant. Megan's soccer games had family cheering sections. My science fair projects got lost under the mail stacked on the kitchen counter. When I tried to speak up, my mother cut me off with that tired refrain, "Don't be selfish, Julia. You're the big sister. You should be happy for her." So I stopped speaking up. I swallowed disappointment until it settled in me like a stone. I became skilled at silence, careful not to ask for too much. The label of difficult hung over me like a threat, and I avoided it at all costs. The only person who never treated me like I was invisible was my grandmother, Eleanor Davis. She lived a few miles away in a clapboard house with creaky floors and shelves lined with storybooks she'd kept since her teaching days. Every Saturday I spent with her felt like stepping into another world. She read to me in the evenings, her voice calm and steady, and when I asked questions, she never brushed them aside. "Your curiosity is a gift," she told me once, smoothing my hair. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. With her, I wasn't the shadow, I was simply myself." I remember sitting at her kitchen table, legs swinging, as she taught me how to play cards. Megan burst in demanding attention, and Grandma just smiled. "You can play too, honey, but Julia was here first." That small defense meant more to me than all the applause my parents ever gave Megan. In her eyes, I was not second best. I was enough. The years passed, and the divide in my family only grew wider. By the time I was in college, Megan was already an online darling, posting ballet photos and being showered with compliments. My mother bragged about her constantly to anyone who'd listen. I stayed quiet, focused on classes and my part-time job at a bookstore. Whenever I came home for holidays, the imbalance pressed harder, but I told myself I was used to it. It didn't hurt as much when you expected nothing. Then 2018 came, and everything shifted. My grandmother grew frail, her once strong hands trembling as she held her teacup. I visited her nearly every day, balancing classes and work so I could sit with her in the evenings. She would rest in her armchair, and I'd read to her the same way she once read to me. One night she called me into her bedroom. Her voice was thin but steady. "Julia, darling, there's something I want you to have." She reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box, the color of midnight. My breath caught as she placed it in my hands. Inside, nestled against the satin lining, was a diamond pendant, shaped like a teardrop hanging from a delicate gold chain. It shimmered even in the dim light, carrying decades of memory with it. I had seen it in old family photos draped around her neck on her wedding day, gleaming at anniversaries. I knew what it meant. "This necklace," she whispered, "is for your wedding day. I want you to wear it when you marry the person you love. That way you'll feel me with you. Promise me you'll keep it safe." Tears blurred my vision. "I promise," I told her, my voice breaking. She smiled, then the kind of smile that had always made me feel seen, and squeezed my fingers around the box. "Never forget, Julia. You are not invisible. You never were." A few weeks later, she was gone. The house felt empty without her laughter, without the stories that filled the walls. At the funeral, people spoke about her kindness, her fairness, her endless patience. I stood apart, clutching the necklace in my purse, the weight of it anchoring me. While my parents fussed over Megan, making sure she looked perfect in her black dress for the service, I held onto that velvet box like it was the last piece of proof that I mattered to someone. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the box again. The diamond glinted, catching the faint glow of the bedside lamp. I pressed it against my chest and felt something I hadn't in years: certainty. This necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was my grandmother's faith in me, made tangible, her way of saying, "I see you." In that moment, I swore to myself I would honor her gift. One day, when I walked down the aisle, that necklace would rest against my heart. No one could take that from me. At least that's what I believed. The first week of January 2019, Daniel and I sat at our tiny kitchen table in Cambridge, stacks of ivory envelopes spread around us. The smell of coffee mingled with the sharp tang of sealing wax as we pressed stamps onto invitations. Each one carried our names in Navy script. The date set the place reserved. We laughed about which friends would RSVP first, which cousins might make excuses. But my heart was light. It felt real. Our wedding was no longer a dream in a notebook. It was happening. Within days, responses started pouring in. My coworkers at the nonprofit cheered when I handed them envelopes promising to be there. Monica texted me pictures of her dress options. Even neighbors I barely knew dropped notes in my mailbox saying how excited they were. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who wanted to celebrate me, not just tolerate me. Then 2 weeks later, everything shifted. I was scrolling through my phone during a lunch break when Megan's face filled my screen, beaming beside a man I had only met once. The caption screamed, "She said yes. Can't wait to marry my Matthew." Below it, hearts and champagne emojis flooded the comments. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. My little sister was engaged. That night, Mom called me before I could even process. Her voice dripped with excitement. "Julia, isn't it wonderful? Megan is marrying into the Collins family. Do you know who they are? Old New York money generations of influence. Patricia Collins sits on 3 charity boards. Imagine the doors this will open. She didn't ask about my day. She didn't ask how wedding planning was going. She only wanted to gush about Megan's future." A week later, glossy invitations arrived at nearly everyone's house in town. Megan's engagement party. The gold foil shimmered the venue, printed in bold letters, a rooftop hotel ballroom in downtown Boston. The date at the bottom made my stomach twist. It was the same day as my wedding. I stared at the card in disbelief, the edges cutting into my palm. It couldn't be a mistake. No one books a ballroom without knowing the date. They had chosen that day on purpose. My day. I called Mom, my hands trembling. "You know that's my wedding day," I said, voice tight. There was a pause, then her sigh heavy with manufactured patience. "Julia, we can't be in 2 places at once. You'll understand when you're a mother. Megan's future in-laws are flying in from New York and Europe. This is important. We'll figure something out. You'll figure something out." My throat burned. "You mean you won't be at my wedding?" Another sigh. "Don't be dramatic. We'll make it work." That was the Midwestern code my mother always used. "We'll make it work" never meant they would. It meant I was on my own. 3 days later, my father finally responded to the text I'd sent with a picture of our venue. Just a thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. As if acknowledging it at all was a chore. Daniel found me staring at my phone. "What's wrong?" I handed it to him. He frowned, shook his head, then wrapped his arms around me. "They'll regret it, but we won't let it ruin our day." I wanted to believe him, but the truth pressed heavier every time I looked at Megan's engagement post. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, everyone buzzing about the Collins family connection. My wedding seemed to vanish beneath it, a footnote in my own life. The worst betrayal came quietly. Sarah Miller. My best friend since we were 6 had promised to stand beside me as maid of honor. We'd planned it for years, giggling under bleachers, swearing blood oaths with sticky fingers from popsicles. She had said yes immediately when I asked her. Then in early February, she texted me, "Jules, I can't. You've been so difficult about the guest list. I don't want the drama. I'll still support you from afar." I sat on my couch rereading the message until the words blurred. Difficult. I had asked her to keep the guest list small to focus on the people who mattered. That was all. Now she was aligning herself with Megan too. When I called, her phone went straight to voicemail. When I checked Instagram there, she was tagged in Megan's posts, laughing with her at bridal shops holding champagne glasses. She hadn't just stepped away from me. She had stepped toward Megan, toward the glow my family worshipped. At work, my coworkers asked if I was excited, and I forced smiles. Of course, I said scribbling notes for grant applications to distract myself. But inside, dread hollowed me out. Every update about Megan spread faster than mine. Every conversation with my parents ended with her name, not mine. My wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love, of the life Daniel and I had built together. Instead, it was being overshadowed, swallowed whole. One evening, Daniel found me at the kitchen table staring at our stack of RSVPs. He slid into the chair beside me, brushing his hand against mine. "What is it?" "They picked my day," I whispered. "They're making sure no one shows up." His jaw tightened. "Julia, listen to me. We'll get married no matter what. Even if it's just the two of us and a justice of the peace. This isn't about them." I nodded, but my chest ached. Because it was about them. It was always about them. And now, even on the day that was supposed to belong to me, Megan's shadow stretched across everything. The invitations gleamed on the counter, taunting me. The gold foil caught the light like fire. I pushed them into the trash, but the sting didn't fade. My wedding wasn't canceled, but it already felt hijacked. My joy had been muted not by accident, but by design. And I knew then that when I walked down that aisle, I wouldn't just be carrying flowers. I'd be carrying the weight of being invisible in my own family's story. The morning of May 11th, 2019, dawned brighter than I had imagined. Sunlight streamed across the Charles River, the city waking slowly as I stood before the mirror in a white satin dress. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the veil. Daniel's reflection appeared behind me, his tie still crooked, his smile steady. "You ready?" he asked, and I nodded even though my stomach churned. I had dreamed of this day for years, but underneath the nerves was a hollowness I couldn't explain away. By the time I stepped into the Boston Conservatory, the string quartet was already playing their music, filling the glass hall with warmth. Friends clapped, neighbors waved, children laughed as they fidgeted in their seats. I smiled, let the sound buoy me, tried to let it be enough. Yet deep inside, I felt the gap where my family should have been. Their absence pressed like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. The ceremony moved forward in a blur. The minister's voice rose and fell. Daniel's eyes never leaving mine. When he said, "I do," his voice cracked and the guests cheered. I whispered, mine back lips trembling, and when we kissed, petals scattered down around us. For a moment, I let myself believe this was all that mattered. This man, this promise. Not the emptiness in the front rows, not the absence disguised as silence. Cocktail hour spilled into the garden, laughter floated beneath the glass ceiling. I tasted champagne, laughed at Monica's jokes, hugged children who ran in circles around me. Yet my clutch buzzed against my hip like a wasp trapped in a jar. I tried to ignore it. When I finally slipped it open, the screen glared 47 missed calls from Mom. My breath caught. Daniel leaned closer. "Is it urgent?" he asked, but I shook my head. No. I lied, tucking the phone away, though the pit in my stomach deepened. During dinner, the long tables glittered with candles. Plates of lemon risotto and chicken piccata passed down rows of smiling faces. Daniel's best man told a story about him trying to fix a garbage disposal with a whisk, and the whole room erupted in laughter. I smiled, my cheeks aching, but my ears kept straining for the faint vibration from my bag. I couldn't unsee the red numbers on the screen. 47? Not one congratulation. Just insistence. It was Lauren Price who pulled me aside near the dessert table, her hand warm against my arm. She leaned in, voice low. "Julia, you should know. Your parents have been calling people all week. They told them not to come here. Said it would mean more if they supported Megan tonight." Her eyes softened. Some guests felt pressured. They didn't want to risk being on your family's bad side. I stared at her, the noise of the room fading. They told people not to come. My throat tightened, fury sparking with disbelief. Lauren nodded, biting her lip. "I shouldn't even be telling you, but you deserve to know." She hesitated, then added, "Richard was overheard tonight at Megan's party. He joked you weren't close to anyone, so it made sense no one showed up. People laughed." The words hit like a physical blow. My father, laughing about my loneliness, making a joke of my isolation. My knees nearly buckled, and I steadied myself on the edge of the table. Around us, guests clinked glasses, oblivious. Daniel appeared, his smile fading when he saw my face. "What happened?" he whispered. I forced a smile for him, for everyone watching, but my voice barely rose. "Nothing. Just, I need some air." I slipped outside into the conservatory garden. The night air was cool, lanterns strung along the trees swaying gently. The string lights twinkled above like stars caught in branches. For a moment, I let the silence wrap around me, but then my phone buzzed again, insistent. The vibration rattled against the champagne flute in my clutch, crawling across the gravel table beside me. I stared at it, the numbers burning into my vision. 48, 49, 50. I gripped the phone but didn't answer. Instead, I lifted my eyes to the glowing rows of string lights, the sound of laughter echoing faintly from inside. My heart pounded heavy and uneven. I should have felt joy. I had just married the man who loved me more than anything. Yet the truth pressed sharp against my ribs. My own parents had worked to erase me from my own wedding day. And now, as my phone vibrated like a hammer against my chest, I felt the weight of their choice suffocating me. I set the phone face down on the stone ledge, the screen buzzing against the cold surface, and stared into the darkness of the garden, the celebration behind me fading into something I could no longer touch. Back in the hotel suite that night, the laughter from our reception still ringing faintly in my ears, I finally allowed myself to check my phone. A new message from Lauren waited at the top. I tapped it open, expecting maybe a kind word, a simple congratulations to soften the edges of the day. Instead, an image bloomed across the screen and my breath caught in my throat. Megan stood in a white gown, satin shimmering under ballroom lights, her smile wide and triumphant. Around her neck hung the necklace. Not just any necklace, the diamond teardrop pendant, delicate and unmistakable. My grandmother's necklace, the one she had pressed into my hand with frail fingers the year before she died, whispering that it was for me, for my wedding day. The one my mother had told me wasn't fit to wear anymore, that the clasp was broken, that the stones had dulled. Yet here it was, glowing under chandeliers, gleaming like it had been waiting for Megan all along. My knees buckled and I sank onto the edge of the bed, the layers of lace pooling around me. My hands shook so violently the phone slipped and clattered against the hardwood floor. Daniel looked up from the chair where he was unlacing his shoes. "Julia, what is it?" His voice was gentle, but I couldn't answer. I pressed my palm against my mouth, trying to keep the sob from breaking free. He picked up the phone where it had fallen, glanced at the screen and froze. His eyes widened, jaw tightening. That's yours," he said quietly. "That was supposed to be yours." I nodded, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. "She told me it was broken." I whispered, my voice raw. She lied. The room blurred. I saw not the hotel lamp or the champagne flute still sitting half full on the dresser, but the image of my grandmother's hand closing over mine, the weight of the velvet box heavy in my 19-year-old palms. "For your wedding day," she had said, eyes soft but fierce. "So you'll feel me with you." That moment had been a lifeline, a promise that no matter how overlooked I was in my own family, at least one person saw me. And now even that had been stolen. I tried to breathe, but it came out ragged. "It's not just a necklace," I said, rocking slightly. "It's proof she believed in me." And they gave it away like it was nothing. Daniel moved to sit beside me, his arm curling around my shoulders. "Julia," he murmured, "they can't erase what she gave you. You still have her love, her memory. They can't take that. But they had taken the tangible piece the symbol meant for me." I closed my eyes, and the image from Lauren's photo seared deeper Megan's laughter. The diamond catching light, my mother's proud smile in the background, her hand adjusting the chain like she had always intended it for her younger daughter. Betrayal layered over betrayal. It was one thing for them to skip my wedding. It was another to recast me as selfish. But this was theft. This was robbery of the only heirloom that tied me to someone who had loved me without conditions. My tears came harder now, sliding down into the bodice of my dress. Daniel rubbed slow circles on my back, whispering steady words I barely heard. All I could think was how small I had felt standing before those empty chairs, and how much smaller I felt now knowing my parents had taken what was mine and draped it around Megan's neck to dazzle strangers. It was like being erased twice. First from the guest list of my own family, then from my grandmother's legacy. At some point, Daniel pulled me closer, pressed his lips against my temple. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. "I don't know how yet, but we will. This isn't the end of it." I wanted to believe him. But as I looked at the phone again, at Megan's radiant grin and the glitter of the pendant, all I felt was hollow. The box my grandmother had given me sat at the bottom of my dresser drawer at home, empty, a velvet coffin for something that had been promised and stolen. I had guarded that memory like a treasure, and now it felt like ashes slipping through my fingers. I leaned forward, buried my face in my hands, and let the sob finally break free. In that moment, I wasn't a bride basking in the glow of a new marriage. I was a daughter, abandoned. A sister betrayed, a granddaughter robbed. The diamond on Megan's throat wasn't just an heirloom. It was a declaration that in my family's story, I had never been chosen. And as the sobs racked through me, the realization settled cold and sharp. They would never give it back willingly. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed dress, still heavy around me, when the notifications finally wore down my resistance. Dozens of voicemails stacked in red bubbles stared back from my phone. I scrolled thumb, hesitating, then pressed play on the first one. "Julia. Honey." My mother's voice cooed, as familiar as a lullaby. "What a beautiful day for you. I hope everything's going smoothly." For half a breath, I almost believed it, until her tone sharpened like a knife. "Now listen. I gave Megan Grandma's necklace. She needed something meaningful for tonight. Don't make this a big deal, it's just jewelry. You have plenty of beautiful things. Anyway, there's a problem with the caterer over here. They're short on desserts. Could you call that restaurant you know in town, pull some strings for us? We really need you on this. Call me back right away." My hand froze, the phone pressed against my ear. Just jewelry. As if the pendant my grandmother had promised me, the one she had placed into my hands like a blessing, was nothing more than costume sparkle. As if the memory of her voice, "For your wedding day," was disposable. My throat tightened, bile rising. The voicemail ended, but another began automatically. Julia, it's Mom again. I don't know why you aren't answering. Everyone's waiting on you. Megan can't deal with this kind of stress. You're better at fixing things you always have been. Just make a few calls and help us out. The next message bled into the one after, her tone swinging from sweet to scolding, then to exasperated. You're being childish. Stop ignoring me. Your sister needs you more than ever. Each word hammered against me until I could hardly breathe. I stumbled into the bathroom, phone still clutched in my hand, and shut the door. The mirror reflected a stranger. My makeup streaked mascara shadowing under my eyes, the veil limp against my hair. The dress, once shimmering, now clung to me like a costume I didn't deserve. I pressed my palms to the sink, gasping, and the memories came flooding back. Every birthday where Megan's cake towered while mine was sliced before I could blow out the candles. Every recital where she had the spotlight while I scanned the bleachers for parents who never came. Every time I tried to claim something, attention, affection, fairness, and was told I was selfish. Every time I heard, "Be happy for your sister, don't make a fuss," the words had carved me into someone careful, quiet, invisible. And now, on the one day that was supposed to belong to me, they had skipped my wedding, smeared my name to guests, and still had the audacity to demand my help. I stared at my reflection, eyes rimmed red, and realized it wasn't just neglect. It was a pattern, a lifetime of erasure. I wasn't a daughter to them, not really. I was a function, the fixer, the shadow. My phone buzzed again on the counter, another voicemail lining up. I picked it up not to listen, but to save. One by one, I archived them into a folder. I pulled up Lauren's photo of Megan in the necklace, saved it too. Screenshots of texts. Every scrap of evidence went into digital files, neat and deliberate. My fingers shook, but with every tap a strange steadiness grew. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was survival. Proof that one day when the time came, I could lay the truth bare and they wouldn't be able to twist it. When I finished, I sank onto the tiled floor, the lace of my gown spilling around me like water. The hum of the hotel's air vent filled the silence. For the first time all day, I wasn't crying. My chest still hurt, but the tears had dried into something harder. A decision. They had made me invisible my entire life, but tonight, holding the evidence in my phone, I felt a flicker of clarity. I couldn't undo the years of being overlooked. But I could decide this: I would not stay erased. Not forever. The dress rustled as I pulled my knees to my chest, clutching the phone against me. In the glow of the bathroom light, the plan wasn't clear, but the resolve was: every voicemail, every lie, every stolen thing, I would keep it. I would remember. And when the moment came, I would make sure they did too. The first weeks of 2020, I threw myself into work with a desperation that felt like oxygen. My nonprofit in Boston had always been a second home, but now it became the place I lived. I arrived before the sun rose, coffee clutched in my hand, and often left after the cleaning crew had turned off the lights. 12, sometimes 14 hours slipped by in a blur of spreadsheets and draft proposals. My desk filled with sticky notes scrawled with deadlines, lists of potential donors, reminders to breathe. I had never written a grant proposal on my own before, but necessity pushed me. I pored over sample language late into the night, circling verbs, crossing out jargon, rewriting until the sentences glowed with clarity. When our largest donor hesitated to renew, my director looked at me with worry. If we lose them, Julia, we're in trouble. My pulse pounded, but I raised my hand anyway. Let me pitch them. A week later, I sat in a conference room, slides open on the screen, voice shaking at first, then steadying as I spoke about the women we served, their names, their stories, the children whose lives had shifted because of one clinic visit. By the time I finished, the donor leaned back and said, "We'll renew. In fact, we'll increase." I walked out with my chest expanded, a small victory that felt like survival. Daniel was my constant shadow through it all. He'd show up outside my office with takeout boxes when the clock passed 9. His tie loosened his smile. "Patient. Eat, Jules," he'd remind me, sliding dumplings across the desk while I kept typing. Some nights we sat together in silence, him sketching ideas on his laptop, me reworking numbers, our hands brushing in quiet companionship. When exhaustion caught me when I sagged against the chair whispering, "I can't keep this pace," he would tilt my chin, eyes steady. "You can, but even if you can't, I'll be here." By spring, the mentorship idea I had scribbled in notebooks began to take shape. I convinced the library downtown to loan us a meeting room once a month. 5 women showed up the first time, all clutching notebooks, faces lined with nerves. We talked about how to draft business plans, how to pitch ideas to skeptical investors, how to keep going when the math didn't add up. I brewed coffee in thermoses, printed handouts on my own dime, and went home that night buzzing with purpose. By summer, the room was packed. Women squeezed into corners, waiting lists forming. Local reporters started calling. "Can we feature your program?" one asked. My stomach twisted at the thought of publicity, but I said yes. The first article appeared in the Boston Globe, small but significant. Nonprofit leader fosters women entrepreneurs. My name in print, my photo on the page. It felt strange and validating all at once. Strangers emailed me thanks. Other organizations reached out to collaborate. For once, my work was visible, not hidden behind someone else's glow. I should have felt pride, but pride was complicated. Every accomplishment, every headline was tinged with a quiet grief that my parents would never see it, or worse, would dismiss it as trivial. At night, lying beside Daniel, I would whisper, "Do you think they know? Do you think they've even heard?" He would brush hair from my forehead and answer, "It doesn't matter. You know, I know, everyone who matters knows." I tried to believe him. Some nights I succeeded. In November, an email landed in my inbox, an invitation to speak at a regional conference on women in leadership. My hands shook as I read it twice, then 3 times. I printed it out, carried it in my bag for days before telling anyone. "You should do it," Daniel said, immediately grinning. "This is your stage." Fear clawed at me. My voice still wavered in small rooms. Could I stand before hundreds? The night of the conference, I paced behind the curtain papers, trembling in my hand. I heard the hum of voices beyond the clink of silverware against plates. When they called my name, I stepped out, lights flooding my eyes. The podium felt too tall. My throat dry, but then I saw faces lifted toward me. Women waiting, listening. I took a breath. I spoke. About failure, about persistence, about the nights I thought I couldn't go on, and the mornings I did anyway. My voice steadied, grew louder, filled the hall. By the end, they were on their feet, clapping, the sound rolling over me like a wave. As I stepped down, the stage lights dimming behind me, my heart hammered, not from fear but from recognition. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as Megan's older sister, not as the fixer, not as the invisible child in a family who looked past me, but as Julia Bennett. A woman who had built something on her own. A woman who mattered. Rain drummed against the windows that March night, the kind of steady downpour that made the whole apartment hum. Daniel was asleep on the couch, a book splayed open on his chest, the lamp still glowing. I sat cross-legged on the floor with a stack of old boxes pulled from the closet papers, scattered like fallen leaves. I had promised myself for months I would organize them, but I think part of me had avoided it. Every folder carried ghosts. I opened one labeled, Grandma 2018. My breath catching at the sight of her looping handwriting. There were grocery lists, old recipes for molasses, cookies, notes she had scribbled on church programs. Then I clicked open a folder on my laptop, the scanned documents I had made when I helped her sort her estate paperwork. I hadn't looked at them since. One file blinked up at me. Last Will and Testament Eleanor Davis. My throat tightened as I double-clicked. The words appeared in black and white, neat paragraphs of legalese. I skimmed hands, trembling, until one line pulled me to a stop. I leave my wedding necklace to my granddaughter Julia Bennett to be given to her on the day of her marriage. My name printed clear as day. The necklace identified specifically. My chest squeezed so hard I thought I might break. It wasn't a half-remembered promise. It wasn't a dream. It was written, binding, undeniable. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears flooding my eyes. All the nights I had doubted myself, wondering if maybe I had misremembered her words, maybe imagined the importance she placed on it. Those doubts evaporated in an instant. The truth was here, legal permanent. She had chosen me. She had wanted me to have it. I closed the laptop gently as if the screen itself were fragile glass, and sat in silence. The rain pounded harder, filling the room with its rhythm. My hands were still shaking when Daniel stirred and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, voice husky from sleep. I swallowed. "I found something." My voice cracked, and he was beside me in a moment. I turned the screen toward him, showing him the line. He read it once, then again, his jaw setting. "Julia," he whispered, "this changes everything." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was rightful. A few days later, another email pinged into my inbox from Lauren. She had been careful ever since that night at my wedding, calling only when she knew no one else would hear. This time, her subject line was plain, "You should see this." My stomach dropped as I opened the attachment. It was a high-resolution scan of a document I had never seen before, an inventory sheet from my grandmother's estate signed by witnesses, executors, and at the bottom, a note scrawled in bold type, released to Megan Bennett for temporary use June 2019, to be returned to rightful owner. Beneath it was my mother's signature. Patricia Bennett, written neat and deliberate. I covered my mouth, the room spinning. She had known. She had signed her name, acknowledging it was mine. Not just forgotten, not careless, deliberate, calculated. She had lied to me with her eyes steady, her voice smooth, telling me the clasp was broken, the stones dull. And all along she had intended to hand it to Megan like a crown. I called Lauren immediately, my hands trembling. She picked up in a whisper. "I shouldn't have sent it, Julia, but I couldn't keep it to myself. I found it in a stack of Megan's planning files." "She's not careful." "Thank you," I breathed. My voice shook so badly I could hardly form words. "You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Lauren said softly. "Be careful. If they find out you have it—" "They won't." I cut in firmer than I felt. "They won't." My pulse thundered as I hung up. The document still glowed on the screen, damning in its clarity. That night I sat at my desk, the rain finally easing the city lights smudging across the window pane. I stared at the two documents side by side, my grandmother's will and my mother's release form. Together they told a story louder than any denial Patricia could spin. Proof not just of my right, but of her betrayal. I saved them into a new folder on my laptop, labeling it simply evidence. Then I leaned back, my chair creaking, and let the silence of the apartment wrap around me. My chest still ached, but underneath the ache was something harder, a flicker of resolve sharp as glass. They had stolen from me my place at my own wedding, my dignity, my grandmother's gift. But now I had more than grief. I had ammunition. And for the first time, the thought came to me clear and certain. One day I would use it. Edward Harris's office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place where voices never needed to be raised because the weight of the shelves did all the talking. I sat across from him at a polished walnut desk, my hands damp around the folder I had carried like a lifeline. The raincoat I'd worn from the subway was draped over the chair drops, still sliding off its edge. My heart thudded so loudly I was afraid he could hear it. He opened the folder with slow, deliberate care. First, the will scanned neatly with my grandmother's signature and the clause naming me. Then the release form, Patricia's handwriting, her signature curling at the bottom as if she hadn't flinched while betraying me. He read without interruption, only the occasional tightening of his jaw giving away his thoughts. Finally, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Julia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is clear. Legally, the necklace is yours. What your mother did, allowing it to be used otherwise and failing to return it, is wrongful withholding of inherited property. The words landed heavy legal, but validating. Wrongful withholding. It sounded exactly like what it was, theft, with a polite name. Could I sue them? I asked, my throat dry. The question felt dangerous just leaving my lips. These were my parents, my sister, but also the people who had gutted my wedding day and stolen what was mine. Yes, he answered without hesitation. You could sue your parents for failing to deliver the inheritance as required. You could sue your sister for possession of stolen property. And you would win. He tapped the page with one finger. The will is unequivocal. The release proves knowledge and intent. No judge could ignore this. I gripped the arms of my chair, my body torn between relief and dread. Winning on paper didn't erase the years of being ignored, but it was still a victory I had never thought possible. Still the image of my mother's face in a courtroom, Megan's eyes flashing with tears. She knew how to summon at will. It unsettled me. If I did, I asked slowly, what would it mean? What would actually happen? Edward adjusted his glasses. If you filed suit today, we could seize the necklace, seek damages, perhaps even legal costs. It would be public. Court records always are. And with your sister preparing a very public marriage, the timing could be devastating. He let the last word hang in the air, measured precise. I shifted in my seat, my pulse quickening. Devastating. Part of me recoiled at it, but another part, the one that had sat through a wedding with empty chairs, the one that had sobbed in a hotel bathroom while listening to voicemails calling me selfish, felt a flicker of satisfaction. Still, I whispered, "They're my family." He didn't soften. Family or not, what they did was illegal. You deserve to decide how to respond. Do you want to win quietly, or do you want to make it known? The choice pressed hard against my chest. Quietly meant recovery. The necklace returned to me tucked away as if nothing had happened. Publicly meant exposure, their lies laid bare under the scrutiny of people who had once believed them. I imagined Megan standing in her gown before cameras, her neck bare where the diamond should have been. I imagined Patricia realizing her name, her signature had betrayed her. For years, they had written me out of my own story. But this could write me back in. I rose slowly, gathering the papers back into the folder. Edward didn't rush me. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, but his silence heavy with expectation. Not yet, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. But when it matters most, I want it public. He gave a single nod, as though he had known my answer all along. Then we prepare carefully. Timing is everything. Outside, the Boston air was sharp late autumn wind cutting across the street. I held the folder to my chest as I walked the city buzzing around me. Horns, footsteps, the scent of roasted nuts from a cart. I felt the cold seep through my coat, but beneath it something warmer burned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't at their mercy. I wasn't reacting to their choices. I was holding proof leverage power. By the time I reached the subway stairs, my grip on the folder had steadied. I descended into the echo of trains, the roar of tracks, and realized with a shiver of clarity they had taken almost everything from me, but not this. Not anymore. By the summer of 2021, Megan's wedding had become more than a family event. It was a spectacle. Every glossy magazine in New York seemed to whisper about it, and the Collins name ensured coverage that spilled beyond society pages. Harper Estate in Westchester was booked solid for months. Yet somehow Megan had claimed it, fountains, marble staircases, and sprawling gardens, all polished for her perfect day. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. By then we weren't even pretending to be in contact. But I didn't need a seat in the audience. My place was elsewhere in the quiet planning that had been unfolding for months. I had sat in Edward Harris's office enough times to know he was a man of precision, never rushing, never stumbling. And on this day his role was simple: deliver truth dressed in legal language that couldn't be spun or ignored. I spent the morning of her wedding at my apartment in Cambridge, phone in hand, waiting. The sky outside was a clear, merciless blue sunlight bouncing off the Charles River. I pictured Megan and her bridal suite stylists, buzzing around her photographers, snapping Patricia hovering with that ever-smooth smile. I could almost hear my father chuckling in the background, bragging about the Collins wealth as if it were his own. The thought churned my stomach, but I forced myself to focus. By the end of the day, they would no longer control the story. At precisely 2:30 p.m., Edward texted me, "We're here." I imagined him stepping onto the gravel drive of Harper Estate, his dark suit crisp, his assistant carrying a neat stack of envelopes embossed with his firm's name. Vanessa Cole, the journalist I had carefully cultivated over months, was already inside. She had promised not to interfere, only to watch to record what others might miss. According to the plan, Edward waited until the wedding planner was free from last-minute chaos. At 3:15 sharp, he approached Patricia in the main hall where guests were beginning to gather for cocktails. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He simply handed her the sealed envelope, nodded politely, and said, "You've been served." One copy went to the planner, another to Megan herself through her bridal attendant. Legal notice. The words, "Every polished family dreads." The ripple was immediate. Patricia's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the paper. Guests nearby paused, curiosity sparking. The planner read quickly, his lips tightening. He knew the stakes. Venues don't risk liability when legal ownership is disputed. I wasn't there to see it, but Vanessa's text later described it in detail. Room went dead quiet. Patricia looked like glass about to shatter. Megan found out minutes later in her bridal suite. I pictured the moment as Lauren relayed it to me over the phone that evening. Megan in her silk gown, makeup flawless, photographers poised for the jewelry shots. A bridesmaid whispered something in her ear, handed her the document. She scanned it, her expression shifting from confusion to rage. Then came the screaming. Not delicate tears or staged sadness, but raw, furious shrieks that carried down the corridor. "They're saying it's Julia's," she yelled, voice cracking. "It's not hers, it's mine." The stylist backed away, mascara wand trembling in her hand. One photographer snapped a shot before realizing the moment wasn't meant for glossy spreads. Mascara streaked Megan's cheeks as she clawed at the clasp, ripping the necklace from her throat. The pendant tumbled against her bodice before a bridesmaid caught it. "Take it away," she shrieked. "I don't want it here." Backstage chaos spiraled. Bridesmaids whispering, guests outside murmuring as word spread through the estate like wildfire. "It belongs to Julia." "Did you hear about the will? Patricia signed something, didn't she?" The phrases carried fragmented but sharp enough to wound. Vanessa's message pinged on my phone as I sat alone in my living room. "She's melting down. People are whispering your name." I set the phone down, staring at the lamplight on the hardwood floor. My hands were steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging for recognition. I had become the silence they couldn't ignore. At Harper Estate, the bridal suite devolved into a war zone. Patricia tried to soothe Megan, but her mask slipped, panic etched into every line of her face. Richard muttered about lawyers, about timing, about how this couldn't have happened today of all days. Megan threw a bouquet against the mirror petals, scattering like confetti across the marble floor. The wedding planner whispered to an assistant, "No necklace shots. No risk of liability." Photographers packed up their equipment, the image Megan had boasted about for months vanishing before her eyes. I pictured it all as if I stood in the corner watching. My sister in her gown, her face streaked mascara, running screaming at my mother. My parents caught between anger and fear. Guests asking why the bride had spent months bragging about an heirloom that never belonged to her. The Collins family stiff with embarrassment, their investment unraveling into gossip fodder. In my apartment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of my phone as more texts from Vanessa came in. Each one painted the scene in sharper strokes. The necklace gone, the bride undone, the family's story cracking in real time. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and let the quiet settle. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. It wasn't about gloating or revenge shouted in their faces. It was about the truth finally cutting through the lies they had spun for years. And as I sat there, steady for once, I knew this was only the beginning. By dawn the next morning, my phone buzzed itself awake with notifications. Instagram feeds filled with grainy shots from Harper Estate guests, whispering about the bride's meltdown. One image spread fastest. Meghan storming down a staircase, mascara-streaked neckline bare. The caption under it was short and cutting. Missing heirloom. By noon, Vanessa's article appeared on the New York Times website. The headline stretched across the screen, "The Missing Heirloom. Promised to the wrong bride." I read every word heart-pounding. She wrote about the will, about the signed release, about the necklace's rightful owner. She never named me outright, but she didn't need to. Anyone who knew our family could connect the dots. The closing line rang like a verdict. The heirloom has since been returned to its rightful granddaughter as written. Within hours, the story was everywhere. News anchors debated it on morning shows. Gossip blogs dissected it, guests from the wedding leaking snippets of conversation. Screenshots of Patricia clutching the legal notice of Meghan's tantrum in the bridal suite of the Collins family, stiff with fury. They spread like fire. The perfect image Meghan had curated collapsed in real time, leaving only fragments and ridicule. Lauren called that afternoon, her voice hushed but laced with disbelief. "Julia, it's chaos. The Collinses are livid. They spent 6 figures on that wedding, and all anyone's talking about is the missing necklace. Meghan hasn't left her room. Patricia's pacing like a caged animal, and Richard keeps muttering about lawyers, but they know it's hopeless. The documents are airtight. Everyone saw the release with Patricia's signature. There's no way out." Oh. I listened in silence, gripping the edge of my desk. Part of me expected to feel pity, but none came. For once, their scrambling wasn't my responsibility. By the next week, the fallout deepened. Patricia's charity circle quietly removed her from committees. Richard's furniture business, once bolstered by connections, saw clients drift away. Invitations to galas stopped arriving. They had built their social identity on appearances, and now the same society turned its back on them. Sarah wasn't spared either. The same friends who once gossiped with her at coffee shops now unfollowed her online. At the elementary school where she taught colleagues whispered keeping distance. She reached out once, a brief text. "Obs?" I never meant for it to go this far. I deleted it without replying. She had chosen her side long before, and this was the cost. Meanwhile, Meghan became a punchline. Memes of her tear-streaked face circulated, online captions mocking her obsession with status. Hashtags trended for days. Even the Collins family couldn't contain the damage. Matthew, her new husband, appeared at a charity event alone 2 weeks later, reporters circling with questions he refused to answer. Back in Boston, I sat at my kitchen table as rain tapped against the window. A small velvet box rested before me. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was, the necklace. The diamond teardrop gleamed faintly in the lamplight, delicate and undeniable. I reached out, brushing it with the tips of my fingers. Cold at first, then warming against my skin. For so long it had been a symbol of what was stolen from me. Now returned, it felt heavier, richer. Not jewelry. Proof. Proof that my grandmother had seen me. Proof that I had been right all along. Proof that the lies couldn't last forever. Daniel stepped into the room, drying his hands on a dish towel. He paused when he saw me holding it. "It's back where it belongs," he said softly. I knotted my throat too tight for words. The apartment was quiet, the storm outside muffled. For the first time in years, I felt the sharp edges of injustice dull, replaced by something steadier. Justice. Not perfect, not painless, but real. I closed the box, gently slid it across the table, and folded my hands. The fight had scarred me, but in that moment, sitting in my Boston apartment with the necklace safe again, I finally felt the scale tip. For once, the weight of truth was mine to carry. The years that followed unfolded quietly, but not emptily. By 2022, my nonprofit had grown beyond anything I could have imagined in those early days when I brewed coffee in thermoses and printed handouts at home. We opened new clinics in Worcester and Springfield, serving women who had once been overlooked the way I had been overlooked in my own family. The mentorship program swelled to more than 100 members, women starting bakeries, tech startups, daycare centers. Reporters called it a movement. I just called it survival turned into purpose. I appeared in the Boston Globe again, then the Washington Post. A profile in the Atlantic featured a photo of me at a podium, the headline reading, "The Quiet Architect of Change." When I saw it framed in the office, I felt something loosen in my chest. All my life I had chased recognition from people who never intended to give it. Now strangers, colleagues, neighbors saw me clearly without being asked. It was enough. More than enough. My parents didn't call. My sister didn't write. No holiday cards, no sudden apologies. Just silence. At first I braced myself for the sound of the phone buzzing again, for the flood of voicemails demanding guilting insisting. But weeks turned to months, months into years. The silence remained heavy but steady. It became less like punishment and more like air. Daniel and I bought a modest house outside Cambridge with a wide porch and a backyard where we hosted barbecues. Friends filled our dining room on Sundays, casseroles, crowding the table, laughter, spilling past midnight. There was no hierarchy in that room, no chosen child, no invisible one. Just people who wanted to be there. I learned slowly that family could be built, not just inherited. Sometimes late at night I scrolled past old photos. Megan in recital costumes, my parents clapping in the audience, me in the background with a science fair ribbon. I felt the ache of it, the sting of being erased, but it didn't consume me anymore. Grief passed through like a shadow, quick and sharp, and then it was gone. What remained was a steadiness I hadn't known I could carry. On our third wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised me. We had dinner at a small restaurant on the river, candles flickering, city lights reflecting on the glass. Halfway through dessert, he slid a small velvet box across the table. My breath caught. I opened it, and there it was, the necklace, the diamond teardrop gleaming under candlelight. He stood moving behind me, brushing my hair aside. His hands were steady as he clasped the chain around my neck. The pendant rested against my skin, cool at first, then warming with my body heat. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, the glow of the city framing me. Daniel leaned close, whispering, "It's back where it belongs." In that moment, I saw not the abandoned bride, not the forgotten daughter, but a woman who had chosen her own story. The necklace no longer symbolized loss. It was proof that I had endured, proof that I had fought for myself, even when no one else did, proof that my grandmother had been right about me all along. The years stretched on, and the silence from the Bennets grew permanent. I didn't hear Patricia's sighs or Richard's dismissive chuckles or Megan's sharp digs. I didn't need to. Their absence no longer hurt. It freed me. And every time I touched the pendant at my throat, I remembered silence wasn't just something I survived. It was something I had claimed, reshaped into strength. Now when people ask about my family, I smile politely, change the subject. I don't owe anyone the story of what I lost. I choose to share what I've built. The nonprofit, the women I mentor, the life Daniel and I are crafting day by day. That's the family that matters. And at night, when the house grows quiet and the laughter from the last dinner still echoes faintly in the walls, I slip the necklace off and place it in its velvet box. I no longer fear it being taken. It rests safely on my dresser, not as jewelry, but as testament. I was invisible once. I am not invisible now. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. N'hésitez pas à ça. Stories of justice, family, and strength connect us all, and your voice matters here. Stay with us for more journeys of betrayal, survival, and the power of finding your own truth.